Story 1. I was 14 when it happened. It was the 70s and we lived in a house on the edge of the suburbs in Australia, right where the bushland started. It was the kind of place where, at night, the trees turned into a wall of blackness, and the only sound was the occasional rustling of some animal moving through the undergrowth. That night, my parents and younger siblings had gone out, leaving me alone in the house. I wasn't bothered. I liked the quiet. I was in my bedroom, lying on my bed, reading. The TV was off, the house was still. Then I heard it. At first it was so faint I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, a noise somewhere in the house. I stopped reading and listened. The sound was low, muffled, but definitely there. I sat up, heart starting to thump. The TV wasn't on. We didn't have a radio. There was no reason for any sound, but I could hear it, just barely. Something was wrong. Slowly I put my book down. My bedroom door was already open. Thank God, because it creaked like hell. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up, moving as quietly as I could. The noise was coming from the kitchen. I had to go through the living room to get there. The house felt different now. Just minutes ago it had been normal, warm. Now it felt wrong. Like I wasn't supposed to be there. Like I was intruding in my own home. I stepped into the hallway, barely breathing. The sound got clearer. It wasn't just noise. It was voices. Two people whispering, arguing. I froze. The hairs on my arms stood up. My mind raced. Burglars? I should run, get out of the house. But something about the voices wasn't right. They weren't loud enough, and the words, I couldn't quite make them out, but the tone was wrong. Urgent, hushed, angry. I stood there for 5 minutes, maybe more, just listening. The voices never changed, never got louder, never got quieter. Just that same low, angry whispering. I had to see. If I didn't, I'd never sleep again. I crept into the living room. It was empty, but the voices were louder now, definitely coming from the kitchen. I edged forward, keeping my breathing shallow, my footsteps silent. I reached the corner, took a deep breath. Slowly, I peeked around. The kitchen was empty, but the voices were right there, louder than ever, clearer. Two people arguing in whispers, right in front of me, but there was no one there. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My brain tried to make sense of it. I could hear them, but I couldn't see them. I wasn't imagining it. I knew I wasn't. The voices were real. I had to know where they were coming from. I forced myself forward, step by slow step, towards the sound. My hands were shaking. The voices never stopped, never acknowledged me, just kept whispering, arguing. Then I realized they were coming from the stove. I bent down, heart pounding. The voices were coming from the part where the metal coil connected to the electrical plug. Right there, two people, arguing inside the stove. I backed away so fast I almost tripped. My stomach turned to ice. My mind screamed at me to get out, run, but I couldn't move. I just stood there staring at the stove. The voices didn't stop. I wanted to believe it was the electricity, some weird interference, but it didn't sound like a radio or static. It was real. Two people, whispering, fighting, right there in my kitchen. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and ran, out of the kitchen, through the living room, down the hallway, straight to my room. I slammed the door, jumped onto my bed, and pulled the blanket over my head. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. I stayed like that for hours. I don't know when the voices stopped. I never heard them fade out. I never heard them go silent. But at some point I realized I couldn't hear them anymore. My parents came home late. I didn't say a word. The next morning I avoided the kitchen. When I finally forced myself to go in, everything was normal. The stove was just a stove. I never heard the voices again, and I never ever stayed home alone at night again. Story 2. I grew up in a quiet old house in a small town. It wasn't haunted. At least I never thought it was. It creaked, sure. The pipes knocked sometimes, but it was just a house. Nothing more. Even when I went to university, I still had my old room. I'd sleep there on weekends and holidays, same as always. It was comfortable, familiar. But something changed when I got older. It started with the sounds. Creaks that had always been there now sounded like footsteps. Not the random pops of an old house settling, but distinct steps, slow, deliberate, always upstairs. I'd be in the kitchen, hear them above me, go check, and find nothing. But the moment I was back downstairs, they'd start again. It rattled me, but I chalked it up to nerves. Maybe I just wasn't used to the house anymore. That was easy enough to believe. Then I started finding things out of place. Small things at first. A book I didn't remember moving, a cabinet left open. I'd be playing video games, put the controller down, answer a message, turn back, and the game would be off. The controller not where I left it. Weird, but not terrifying. Not yet. One night I came home late. It was winter, freezing cold, and the house was empty. My parents were out of town. I locked up, went to my room, and got ready for bed. The silence felt heavier than usual, but I ignored it. I was just tired. I don't know what woke me up. Maybe a sound, maybe nothing. But my eyes snapped open and I knew something was wrong. The air felt thick. My head was foggy, my limbs heavy. I tried to sit up, but the room spun. My heart pounded. I felt wrong. Then I heard it. Someone was in the house. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't imagining it. Heavy footsteps moved down the hall, slow and steady. Right outside my door. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My body felt disconnected, like I wasn't fully there. The footsteps stopped. Then the doorknob turned. My vision blurred. My thoughts scattered. I needed to run. I needed to do something. But I couldn't. The door didn't open. The footsteps didn't retreat. They just waited. Then finally a whisper. Right outside my door. Wake up. A breath against the wood, so close I swore I felt it. I wanted to scream, but my lungs didn't work. My body felt too heavy. My vision darkened at the edges. The world tilted. I was slipping, fading. Then a sharp metallic taste filled my mouth. My stomach lurched. And just like that, I snapped back. I gasped, sucking in air like I'd been drowning. My head pounded. The room spun, but I could move. The footsteps were gone. I rolled out of bed, nearly collapsed, but caught myself. My breath came in shallow gasps as I stumbled to the door. My body still felt wrong, weak, sluggish, but I had to move. I threw the door open. The hallway was empty, dark, silent, but something smelled off. Not like dust or old wood, something sharper, metallic. I forced myself forward, gripping the railing as I stumbled down the stairs. My legs barely worked. My head swam. I reached the bottom, turned toward the living room, and stopped cold. The front door was wide open. Not unlocked, not cracked. Open. Snow blew in, dusting the floor. My breath hitched. I knew I had locked it. Something was wrong. More wrong than just an intruder. More wrong than just footsteps. Then I noticed the smell again, stronger now, a heavy, bitter scent filling my lungs. My head pounded, my stomach twisted. I turned toward the kitchen, and my vision blurred again. The edges of the world wavered, like heat rising off pavement. I reached out, gripping the counter to steady myself. And then I saw it. The stove was on, all 4 burners. No flame, just gas hissing into the air. My head spun harder. My vision flickered. My knees buckled, and I barely caught myself. Carbon monoxide. My brain struggled to piece it together. The dizziness, the weakness, the strange sounds, the whisper. I'd been poisoned. I stumbled forward, fumbling for the knobs. My hands barely worked, my fingers numb and clumsy. But I turned them all off. The hissing stopped. The silence roared in my ears. I forced myself to the back door, threw it open, and collapsed to my knees in the snow. I gasped in deep, burning gulps of cold air. My chest ached, my head pounded, but the fog in my brain started to lift. I don't know how long I knelt there. Minutes, an hour. Long enough for the shaking to stop. Long enough to think. I should have died. The furnace must have been leaking for hours, maybe days. And I'd slept through it, my body shutting down. If I hadn't woken up, If I hadn't heard those footsteps, I never would have woken up at all. But that's the part I can't explain. Because if the footsteps, the voice, the open door, if all of it was just in my head, a hallucination from the gas, then how did I wake up? And if it wasn't a hallucination, then who whispered at my door? Story 3. I was 12 when it happened. I still remember it like it was yesterday. I lived in a quiet neighborhood, a small house with thin walls and old wooden floors that creaked when you stepped on certain spots. My parents both worked late, so I was used to being home alone in the afternoons. It never really bothered me until that day. I had come home from school, dropped my bag by the door, grabbed a snack, and went straight to the bathroom to take a bath. It was one of those days where you just wanted to soak in the tub, let the warm water relax you. I locked the door, ran the water, and got in. The house was silent, that kind of silence where you can hear the faint buzzing of electricity in the walls, the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. It was comforting in a way, familiar. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and dunked my head under the water. Just let myself float for a second. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving across the landing outside the bathroom door. I froze. Water sloshed around me as I sat up, straining to listen. The sound wasn't loud, but in the silence of the house, it might as well have been a gunshot. My parents weren't home. They wouldn't be home for hours. I had no siblings, no pets. There was no reason, no possible reason. Anyone should have been inside. My mind went straight to the worst possibility. Someone had broken in. My heart pounded in my chest, my breathing shallow. I sat there naked in the tub, completely vulnerable. I couldn't run, couldn't hide. My phone was in my bedroom. There was nothing I could do except sit and listen as those slow, deliberate footsteps moved across the landing. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that the old wooden floors were settling, or maybe it was something outside. But then it happened again. The same slow, steady sound, moving from one side of the landing to the other. The bathroom door was locked, but suddenly that didn't feel like much of a barrier. If someone wanted to get in, they could, and I had nowhere to go. I held my breath, my entire body tensed. The footsteps stopped. Right outside the bathroom door. I waited. Seconds stretched into eternity. I could hear the water dripping from my arms, the sound deafening in the silence. I knew if I made any noise, whoever was out there would hear me. But they already knew I was here, didn't they? The sound of the water, my movement, it wasn't like I'd been silent. Then the doorknob turned. Not violently, not like someone trying to break in. Just a slow, deliberate twist. Testing, checking. I felt sick. My stomach knotted up so tightly I thought I might throw up. The knob stopped turning, but I could feel it. Someone was standing right there, just inches away. I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit there waiting. My body was shaking, but I forced myself to move. As slowly and quietly as I could, I reached for the plug and let the water drain. I didn't know why, but I felt like I needed to be ready. Ready to run, ready to fight, ready for whatever was about to happen. The silence dragged on. The footsteps didn't come back. The doorknob didn't move again. I took a deep breath and decided I had to look. I had to know. I waited for a moment where everything was still. Then as quickly as I could, I reached out, unlocked the door, and cracked it open just enough to see out onto the landing. The hallway was empty. I waited, my ears straining for any sound. Nothing. The house was dead silent. My heart was still hammering, my hands slick with sweat. I opened the door wider, just enough to get a better look. And then I heard them again. Footsteps, right in front of me, moving across the landing. But I saw nothing. There was no one there. The footsteps kept going, slow and steady, crossing the landing like before. But the space was empty. No shadow, no figure. Just sound. Just the unmistakable, impossible sound of feet moving across the wooden floor. I slammed the door shut and locked it again. My breath came in quick, panicked gasps. I pressed my back against the door, shaking. I stayed there for what felt like forever, listening. The footsteps continued for a few minutes, moving back and forth, before finally stopping. The silence that followed was unbearable. I waited, too scared to move, until I finally built up the nerve to open the door again. Nothing. The landing was empty. I grabbed a towel, wrapped myself in it, and bolted to my room. I locked that door too, sat on my bed, and waited for my parents to get home. I never told them. I don't know why. Maybe I was scared they wouldn't believe me, or maybe I just didn't want to say it out loud. But I never forgot. Story 4. I was alone in my aunt and uncle's house in rural Ireland. Winter, pitch dark outside by 6. They weren't due back for another hour or two. I'd spent the whole day playing Commandos on their PC, lost in it. When it got dark, I didn't bother turning on any lights. Didn't feel like I needed to. I got up to take a piss. Didn't turn on a light for that either. The house was cold, the kind of cold that settles into your bones. While I was in the bathroom, I heard it. Gravel crunching outside. A vehicle pulling up the long lane. That sound alone made my stomach drop. I finished up, went to the window, and peeked through the blinds. A white van. 3 men got out. No hesitation, no lights on inside the van. No indication that they were lost or unsure of where they were. Just parked, doors open, 3 shapes stepping into the dark. I dropped to the floor immediately. My body moved before my brain did. Crawled out of the bathroom, keeping low. No reason to, really. Curtains were drawn, they couldn't see me. But something about them made me feel like standing up would be a mistake. I made my way to my aunt and uncle's bedroom. Big old wardrobe in there, heavy oak. Opened it, climbed in, and pulled some coats over myself. I could still hear them outside. They were talking in that half-loud whisper, just low enough that I couldn't make out words but could hear the tone. They were discussing something. One of them tried the front door. The handle rattled. Locked. Thank God. More whispering. Footsteps moving around the side of the house. I remembered the back door was locked too, but my heart was still hammering. Then nothing. No footsteps, no whispers, no movement. Just silence. That was worse. I stayed buried under coats, barely breathing. Every tiny sound, wood creaking, the wind against the window, felt too loud. I don't know how long I lay there, but my muscles ached from holding still. Then I heard it. A second vehicle. Another set of tires rolling up the lane. A car door slammed. My uncle. His voice cut through the silence, sharp and angry. He was shouting at them, though I couldn't make out what he was saying. The men responded, voices lower, controlled. I imagined them standing there trying to seem casual, hands in pockets, making excuses. Maybe they were asking for directions. Maybe they were pretending to be lost. But my uncle wasn't having it. His voice got louder, more aggressive. Then another silence, a long one, the worst one. I imagined all kinds of things. A fight, a knife, a gun. 3 against 1. I wanted to look, to move, to do something, but fear kept me frozen. Then footsteps again. The sound of men getting back into the van. The engine turned over. The van rolled back down the lane. My uncle stood there for a moment before coming inside. When he found me, I was still in the wardrobe, still under the coats, shaking. He didn't ask why, didn't say anything really. Just locked the door behind him, checked the windows, and stayed up the rest of the night, sitting by the fire with the poker in his hand. They never came back, but I never stayed alone in that house again. Story 5. I was babysitting at a house way out in the middle of nowhere, deep in the mountains of Arizona. The kind of place where, once the sun goes down, the only light comes from the moon, and the only sound is the wind moving through the trees. The parents had left around 7, said they'd be back by midnight. It was just me and the baby. Kid was about a year old, sleeping in his crib. I'd checked on him a couple of times, made sure the baby monitor was on, then settled into the living room to watch TV. Normal night. It was around 10 when I heard it. Laughter, not just any laughter. Deep, gurgling, wrong. Like a group of people all laughing at the same time, but out of sync, like a warped recording. It came from outside near the tree line. I froze. My whole body tensed. At first I thought it was the TV, so I muted it. But the sound didn't stop. I sat there, heart hammering, trying to rationalize it. Coyotes? Sometimes they yip and howl, but this wasn't that. It was laughter, human laughter, or something pretending to be human. Then the baby monitor crackled. The laughter came through it, inside the house. I shot up off the couch so fast I almost tripped. My skin felt like it was shrinking, every hair on my body standing straight up. I grabbed the monitor and stared at it, listened. Heavy breathing, static. Then in the faintest whisper, right next to the microphone, "He's awake." I ran. I don't remember making the decision to move. I just did. Down the hall, into the baby's room. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely turn the doorknob. The baby was sitting up in his crib, staring at the window. I followed his gaze. The curtains were open. The window was shut, but the glass was covered in condensation, like someone had been breathing against it. There was something written in the fog, a single word: laugh. I didn't think. I just grabbed the baby, wrapped him up in a blanket, and bolted. Didn't stop for my bag, didn't stop to turn off the TV. I ran straight out the front door, got into my car, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. The laughter was louder outside, echoing from the trees, surrounding the house. I sped out of there so fast I almost went off the road. I didn't care. I just drove. I called the parents from a gas station about 10 miles away. Told them something was wrong, that someone was outside the house, that I took the baby and left. The mom was freaking out, saying they were on their way back. The dad was pissed, telling me I should have called the cops first. I told him to check the damn baby monitor when he got home. I waited. I wasn't about to go back. An hour later, the parents called me, said the house was fine, no sign of anyone. But the mom sounded off, shaky. Then she asked, "Did you write on the window?" I said no. She got real quiet, then whispered, "It's still there." I never went back. Story 6, I live in a rural spot, just far enough from town that when something bad happens, you're on your own for a while. It's quiet here, mostly woods and farmland. At night, it's pitch black. No streetlights, no neighbors close enough to hear if you scream. One night, a little after midnight, I heard loud banging on my front door. Not knocking, pounding, the kind that rattles the frame. Half asleep, I thought it was my boyfriend. He has a bad habit of showing up late, wanting to crash at my place. I almost ignored it, but something about the sound felt off, too aggressive. I got up and walked to the door, but as I got close, I saw through the small window at the top. It wasn't my boyfriend. It was a man, a big guy, bearded, scruffy, wearing a dark jacket. I could only see the side of his face, but I didn't recognize him. My stomach dropped. He hadn't seen me yet. I backed away, trying not to make a sound. My house is in a dead zone, no cell service. But I had a landline by my bed. I grabbed it, hands shaking, and dialed 911. Dead, no dial tone. It was like a horror movie, like he'd cut the line. The pounding started again, louder this time. "Let me in!" His voice was slurred. Drunk, high, crazy. I didn't care. I grabbed the biggest knife I owned, a heavy chef's knife, and locked myself in the bathroom. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely breathe. I climbed onto the edge of the tub, pressing myself against the wall behind the shower curtain. If he broke in, I'd have the element of surprise. I wasn't going down without a fight. For a moment, I thought my plan was solid. Then I realized something. The landline in my hand was dead, yeah, but I had other handsets around the house. Maybe one of them still had a charge. I've never felt fear like I did in that moment. Climbing down from my hiding spot, unlocking the bathroom door, and stepping into the dark hallway. Outside, he was circling the house. I heard him muttering to himself, running his hands along the siding, testing windows, banging on the walls. Every so often, he'd rattle a doorknob. I knew they were locked, but locks only do so much. I moved fast, checking end tables, counters. My hands were ice cold, shaking so hard I almost dropped the knife. Then finally, I found a phone. It worked. I dialed 911. It rang. Someone answered. "My address is," I was whispering, barely breathing. "There's a man trying to get into my house. My landline's dead. He's been circling the house. I don't know what he wants. The dispatcher kept calm, asked me questions, told me to go back to the bathroom and lock the door. Officers were on their way, but it would take at least 15 minutes. 15 minutes. I went back to the bathroom, locked myself in, stood on the tub again, knife tight in my grip. And then I just waited. The noises outside kept going. The banging, the muttering. I heard him press against a window. The porch creaked under his weight. He was still trying doors, still circling, still looking for a way in. Then the sound stopped. Silence. Nothing for a long time. Long enough that my brain started playing tricks on me. Was he gone? Was he inside? I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. And then, a metallic click. The back door. My blood turned to ice. That door had a weak lock. I never got around to fixing it. I squeezed the knife so hard my fingers ached. The dispatcher was still on the line, whispering to me, trying to keep me calm. Footsteps. Inside. A shadow moved under the bathroom door. I stopped breathing. I swear to God, I stopped breathing. He was just outside, standing there, listening. Then the handle turned. I don't remember making a sound, but I must have. Because right as he started pressing against the door, sirens. Red and blue lights flashed through the window. Car doors slamming, voices yelling. He bolted. I heard the back door crash open, boots pounding against the porch, running into the night. I stayed frozen until I heard officers inside, calling out. I finally unlocked the door and collapsed into their arms. They searched the area but never found him. No footprints, no sign of how he got there or where he went. The only thing they found was the back door, swinging open in the wind. I never slept in that house again. Story 7. I was 13, home alone, skipping school like I always did. My mom was at work, my sister was at school, and it was just me in that house. It was around 1 in the afternoon when I decided to call my mom, just to check in. We still had a landline back then, one of those old corded phones. You pick it up, then dial. I lifted the receiver and froze. No dial tone, just static. Not loud, not harsh. Just that faint, distant hum, like a quiet, empty room on the other end. I hesitated, listening. Then a voice, a girl's voice, young, English accent. "Can you put that down, please?" I blinked, gripping the receiver tighter. The voice wasn't coming from the TV upstairs. Too quiet, and besides, it was just playing some daytime rerun. There was no one else in the house. I swallowed and said, "What? Hello?" She either didn't hear me or ignored me. "Please stop that. Don't do that. Put that down. Please stop. Please put that down. Don't touch that." She wasn't yelling. Her voice was soft, almost pleading, but the more she spoke, the more urgent she sounded. I felt my stomach drop. "Hello? Who is this?" Nothing. Then the sound of fabric rustling, like someone shifting near the phone. A grunt, quiet but close, like someone standing up. I slammed the receiver down and bolted upstairs, heart pounding. I stayed in my room until my mom came home. That night, I told her. She lifted the phone, listened. Just a dial tone. She didn't say I was lying, but she was skeptical. I never skipped school after that, and I never used that phone again. Story 8. I live alone in a small apartment on the second floor of a quiet complex. It's not a bad place, nothing fancy, but enough for me and my chameleon, Jasper. I've had him for a couple of years now, and he mostly keeps to himself, hanging out on his tree by the window. He's the only company I have most nights, and he's good company. That night, I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, occasionally looking up at Jasper. The living room light was on, and the window in front of him reflected the room behind me. It was one of those nights where everything just felt still, too quiet, like the kind of quiet you don't notice until you do. Jasper was watching me. He does that sometimes, both of his eyes locked on me, while his body barely moves. I smiled at him, about to take a picture, when something in the reflection caught my eye. A shape, a dark figure moving across the room. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and my mind scrambled for logic. The only light was the one in the living room, and the only movement should have been me. But I wasn't moving. I was sitting perfectly still, and so was Jasper. Then Jasper flinched. It was quick, but I saw it. His body jerked slightly, and both of his eyes snapped away from me, toward whatever had just moved behind me. My stomach dropped. My brain wanted to explain it away. Maybe it was a shadow from outside, something shifting on the street. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But Jasper wasn't tricked. He was staring, eyes locked on something I couldn't see. I turned my head slowly. Nothing. The room was empty. Everything was exactly as it should be. My kitchen, my hallway leading to my bedroom, the small dining table, the chair slightly pushed out. No one was there. I let out a shaky breath and turned back to the window, needing to confirm what I saw wasn't real. But Jasper was still staring, still tense, still locked on to something. I swallowed hard. "Jasper," I whispered. My voice barely made a sound. He didn't look at me. I turned all the way around this time, scanning every corner, every shadow. My skin crawled as I stood up, my legs suddenly feeling weak. I knew I had seen something, but there was nothing. Then I heard it, a faint creak. It came from behind me, near the hallway. I spun around, heart pounding in my ears. The hallway was dark, too dark, like something was sucking the light out of it. I could barely make out the shape of my bedroom door. It was open. I didn't remember leaving it open. Jasper was still staring. A sharp chill ran down my spine. I didn't want to move. My body was screaming at me to run, to leave, to do something, but I couldn't. I just stood there listening. Then another sound, this time softer, like a breath. I swallowed bile rising in my throat. My hand clenched into a fist, nails digging into my palm. I had to move. I had to check. Slowly, I stepped forward. The floor creaked under me, and the sound felt deafening in the silence. I reached the hallway, my breath shallow. My bedroom door stood open. I stepped inside. The room was empty, but something felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on me. My bed was undisturbed, my desk just as I had left it. But the closet door, it was slightly open. I stared at it, feeling ice crawl up my spine. I never leave my closet open, ever. I reached for the door, fingers trembling. With one quick motion, I yanked it open. Nothing, just clothes, shoes, the usual. But that wrong feeling didn't go away. I let out a slow breath and stepped back, my body still tense. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe, Jasper hissed. It was sharp, loud, like nothing I'd ever heard from him before. A warning, a sound that sent a jolt of pure terror through me. I turned to the window, expecting to see him still on his tree. He wasn't. He was on the floor, eyes wide, body puffed up, staring at something behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My body locked up. The air in the room thickened, pressing against me, suffocating. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. Then the closet door creaked. Slowly. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't moved it, but it was moving, opening wider. Something was there. Jasper let out another hiss, louder, more frantic. My breath came in short gasps, my vision tunneling. I wanted to move. I needed to move. Then, the light flickered, just for a second, and in that second I saw something. A shape, a shadow darker than the dark, standing in the closet, watching me. The light came back. The shadow was gone. The closet door was wide open now. Jasper was gone too. My heart pounded as I scanned the floor looking for him. Jasper? My voice came out hoarse. Then I saw him, under the couch, hidden, pressed against the back wall. He was hiding. I backed away from the closet, my legs barely working. My mind screamed for logic, for reason, but I had none. I didn't think. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and I left. I spent the night at a friend's place. When I got back the next day, the apartment felt normal again, except Jasper wouldn't go near the window anymore, and I never left my closet open again. Story 9. I live alone in a 2-bedroom apartment with my kitten Luna. It's a quiet place. I work late hours, so I'm used to being up when the world is asleep. I'm also a light sleeper. Every little sound wakes me up. That's why what happened that night scared me more than anything else ever has. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke up. Not because of a nightmare or a creak in the floorboards. There was music playing. I laid there for a second, trying to place it. It was faint but unmistakable. Soft, slow, instrumental. It was coming from my spare room. I sat up, my heart already pounding. I had been listening to music before bed on my computer, but I always turned it off before sleeping. My computer never just played music on its own. I knew that for a fact. I reached for my phone to check the time, gripping it tighter than necessary. I had this weird, crawling feeling in my stomach, like something was watching me. But Luna was curled up beside me, her small body rising and falling with steady breaths. She wasn't alert, wasn't spooked. I should have stayed in bed, but I didn't. I got up. My apartment isn't big, but every step toward that room felt like a mile. The hallway was dark, just a faint glow from the streetlights outside bleeding in through the blinds. The music was clearer now, piano notes, slow and deliberate. I reached the door and paused. My computer should have been asleep, screen locked, requiring a password. The screensaver runs for an hour, then it goes black. It shouldn't have been playing anything. I pushed the door open. The room was dark, but my monitor was black, like it had been idle for a while. The music played from the speakers, but the screen didn't show anything. I stepped closer, my fingers hovering over the mouse. The moment I touched it, the music stopped. The screen remained black. No player open, no music app running, just silence. I stood there listening to my own breathing. My skin felt too tight, my scalp tingling. I reached down and checked the volume mixer. Nothing. Nothing was playing. But I had heard it. I wasn't dreaming. I backed out of the room and shut the door. I didn't even turn off the computer. I just went straight back to bed, pulled the blanket over me, and stared at the ceiling, listening to the silence stretch out. Luna stirred and let out a small sigh. I wished I could sleep as peacefully as she did. I never figured out how that music started, but I know I turned it off before I went to bed. And I know my computer doesn't just play music on its own. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Story 10. I live in a house deep in the woods about half a mile from the main road. No neighbors, just an old abandoned apartment building next door. Winters here are brutal, and that night, the snowfall was so heavy it erased everything. No footprints, no tracks, just an untouched white sheet covering the ground. My family was out for the night, and I was home alone. My phone had died, and I was searching for a charger when the dogs started barking. They weren't just barking, they were losing their minds. I checked the windows expecting to see a deer or maybe a stray dog. Nothing, just darkness and snow. Then the knocking started. It wasn't a polite knock, it was violent, like someone was hammering the door with their fists. My front door rattled with the force of it. My stomach dropped. I crept to the peephole, but no one was there. The dogs kept barking, pacing back and forth. Then another knock, this time at the back door. My back door is a glass panel door, and there's a motion sensor light above it. I looked out the kitchen window. The light hadn't turned on. I couldn't see anyone there. My skin crawled. The knocking started again, harder this time. Then both doors, someone or something was hammering both doors at the same time. I ran to the landline. Dead. I grabbed my phone, but it was still off. No charge. I shut off every light inside the house and grabbed my shotgun. I don't know what I thought I was going to do with it, but it made me feel like I had some control. I moved quickly, closing every curtain. If someone was out there, I didn't want them watching me. Then the windows. The knocking moved to the windows. Not just the ones on the ground floor, but the second floor windows too. My blood ran cold. I could hear the impact, heavy and deliberate, circling the house. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. I gripped the shotgun tighter and backed into a corner of the living room, forcing myself to stay still. I don't know how long it lasted. It could have been 10 minutes. It could have been an hour. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the knocking stopped. Silence. Even the dogs had gone quiet. The only sound was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My phone flickered on with just enough charge. I called my mom, whispering what was happening. She told me not to call the cops unless someone tried to break in. She thought it was kids messing around, but there were no kids out here. There were no neighbors, and there were no footprints in the snow. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Slowly, I crept to the front door. I had to look. I cracked it open just enough to peer outside. The porch light cast a weak glow onto the snow-covered ground. It was untouched. No footprints, no marks, nothing. I slammed the door shut and locked it. The knocking never started again, but I sat there, shotgun in my lap, until my family came home. I never told them everything, and even now, years later, I still can't explain it. But every winter, when the snow starts falling heavy, I get that feeling again. The feeling of being watched, of something just beyond the edge of the trees, waiting. And I make damn sure my phone is charged. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.